TV ads are easier.
Yeah. You get more people, right? More eyes.
Yeah, you get more eyes, but get out the vote and canvassing type activities are expensive, but they're more effective when it comes to actually delivering.
Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of. Together, I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. I am so excited to have Fish with me, Sandra Fish, the effervescent and amazing reporter who's been covering Colorado politics and campaign finance specifically here in Colorado for a while. And she is a genius reporter that's uncovered amazing stories, but she knows what the changes in media landscape. And so today we're going to learn from her, what is the new media landscape like? What are her experiences? What has shifted? But also, how is politics shifting? How is money in politics shifting? And what is that have to do over the next year? How is that going to change our elections and everything? Hi, Sandra.
Hey, Alvina, it's so great to be here. Thanks for that kind introduction. But for a while, we could say that as a high school student, I caucused for Mo Udall in Iowa in 1976.
Oh, wow.
I'm over the Iowa caucuses.
I bet. And it such such big changes started in the 70s in politics and the involvement of women. And one of my mentors and amazing women who we should have on the show, Polly Baca, has a lot of stories about her experience at that same time of that shift of women really being involved in politics. So what was it like back then? Let's start there.
You know, I went to that first caucus, and we do a lot of this caucusing in Colorado too. And I think that a lot of people don't understand how personal it is. I mean, I went to somebody's house with my parents, and there were probably like less than a dozen people there. And you basically have got to express in front of all these people, your family, your friends, whoever, who you're for. And I'm for more Mo Udall, and my parents are for Jimmy Carter, and
Yeah.
so was everyone else. But that sort of grassroots thing, I think with the population now and how busy everyone is, it doesn't really work really well anymore. It's hard to get away now. Some people do some of these things virtually, um, like the Democrats primarily, and that gives more people an opportunity to attend. But even then, it isn't the same as, you know, doing a ballot. And I also participated in 1980. Okay, I was for Jerry Brown. And I covered the caucuses in Carroll County, Iowa in 1984. It was a very Democratic county then, and we had every candidate but Jesse Jackson came to town. So I got to see all these people. But still, it's such an interesting small thing. And it's interesting, that was the first year that a woman was nominated to be vice presidential candidate, Geraldine Ferraro, with Walter Mondale. And it has been interesting to see how things have changed. I mean, there's so much more money involved in these things. Like, you look at
Yeah.
how much the ad spending was in Iowa. Ads there are not expensive. And probably hundreds of millions of dollars was spent there. I mean, I watch a lot of sports and a lot of Iowa State and Iowa sports, and I saw those commercials on ESPN or Fox or wherever the games were on. It's like, wow, it's just a deluge of advertising. I mean, the money has really changed a lot. I feel who's spending it and how they're spending it is way different. I mean, it's been great to see. You had a big surge of women candidates and women taking office in the early 90s too. You'd had this thing after Watergate in 74, again in the early 90s. And I feel like again in recent years,
Yeah.
it's pretty impressive.
Well, right now, Iowa caucuses are like, that's what everybody's talking about. But why is Iowa so influential? Why does Iowa matter?
They shouldn't, and I'm not sure they do. Iowa started holding these caucuses in 1972, and they've become like sort of this, maybe originally sort of a bellwether or something. It was the first thing. It's their first opportunity. And I think that the methods have really changed a lot. Like in 1984, I remember going for beers with this guy who was working for Alan Cranston, like one afternoon, one day at the end of the day, he'd spent much of the very cold Iowa afternoon
Oh my God.
in a farmer's pigsty trying to get the guy to go to caucus. I mean, you've got to get people there. It used to be a big ground game. I think that Iowa has changed a lot. Um, Young people leave, and you've seen the media cover this. People graduate from university and they move someplace else to cities,
Mhm.
to larger places here,
Yeah.
Chicago, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and I think that the population is not reflective anymore of the nation at large. They were maybe more so in the 70s and 80s even, but they aren't anymore. And the way the caucuses are run, that state has changed a lot since I left there in 1985. Just like Colorado has changed a ton
Yeah.
since we moved here 30 years ago. And it's just interesting, these changes take place over time. And I think Iowa's no longer relevant, and I would be surprised if in 4 years they're the first with any party.
That's interesting. So, let's talk about your expertise, campaign finance. What does campaign finance mean, and when did it start?
The thing about money in politics is that in order to reach the voters and get your message out as a candidate, you've got to have money. Even if you're just going door to door, you're going to want to give people mailer flyers or something like that you're going to have to pay for, to send
Yeah.
mailers, to do radio ads if you're in a really rural area, or to do TV ads in an urban area. And so it's the way people get the message out.
Yeah.
Back in the early 70s, pre-Watergate, um, which happened when I was like in ninth grade or something. Um, you know, you didn't have these campaign finance laws.
Interesting.
After that, there were, you put limits on how much candidates could raise from an individual. There's no longer that sort of unlimited money that you can take from people. And the reporting much more, it's just gradually gotten more robust about what you have to report and when. But despite that, there's still a lot of mystery there. I mean, you put limits on candidates. One of the interesting things is that in the late 1990s, voters passed these campaign finance limits, and they were in statutes, and it was overwhelming. And then the legislature raised them, because it was in statute. And then in 2002, voters came back and put it in the Constitution. And Colorado, as a result, has some of the lowest um, limits for candidates in the nation. Um, that law, that constitutional provision allowed the limits to be raised with inflation, but the legislative limits were so low, $200 a cycle or $400 for a primary and a general election. They've never raised until in the past year. For this cycle, there's now at 450. And that means it probably will
Yeah.
increase again in the future. But to my knowledge, only Montana has lower rates for legislative candidates than Colorado does. And when you do that, especially to that extent, you push the money to other things.
Yeah.
You really started seeing the outside money in the early 2000s. And originally, before these campaign finance laws in Colorado passed in 2002, I was seeing like the Democratic Party create all these committees, like numerous committees, and
Mhm.
people would be able to give to each of them. And then they'd take the money from those committees and funnel it someplace else. And that has, to my knowledge, from what I've seen, has always happened. But in And people,
Got
you
it.
saw outside money being spent in the aughts here. But when Citizens United happened, the Supreme Court decision in 2010, it allowed corporations and individuals to give unlimited amounts to what we now call super PACs that could spend unlimited amounts to support or oppose candidates as long as they didn't donate directly to the candidate or coordinate with the candidate or the political party. And, what's your definition of coordinate? Um, you know,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, the internet, people are really sophisticated candidates put out B-roll of themselves with no audio on it. So it's great for these people just to rip it off YouTube and put it in a campaign commercial. And, you know, you now have in super competitive contests, the outside money actually typically often exceeds the amount that candidates are spending.
Interesting.
And that money, it's it's always interesting to me because oftentimes it's spent in a negative fashion, like negative
Mm.
TV ads. This person is terrible. I mean, some of them are like comical in the way they look and the sinister, severe things. And, I've talked to a lot of people about TV ads because I kind of follow how the spending goes there because it's one way to track dark money. But I've talked to a lot of academics, and people will tell researchers they do not like these negative ads,
Yeah.
but they remember them.
Yeah.
They remember the negative more than they remember the positive. So it's a double-edged sword. And sometimes these groups will just have tons of money to go after each other with. And, money doesn't always win, but it plays a pretty influential role.
So what do you think that means? Like what are some major shifts that you noticed when you started tracking big money? When were the big years that you think it had a major impact?
It's interesting because in 2004 in Colorado, um, you had these limits for candidates kick in. And at the same time, you had Democrats had won the state Senate in 2000 for the first time in 40 years in 2000. But then they lost it in 2002. Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, the governor's office. But after those campaign limits passed, Democratic groups, not really the party, because you can't coordinate, but, teachers' unions, wealthy donors like now Governor Jared Polis, Tim Gill, Pat Stryker, Rhett Bridges, unions, conservation groups. Uh, and, these people got together and came up with a plan on the Democratic side. And they took people by surprise in 2004. I remember talking to um, state lawmakers from Boulder, one of whom, Alice Madden, was involved in planning some of this. And one of them said, we just need a few Republican primaries to go our way. And by that, they meant they needed the most conservative candidate to win so that their moderate Democrat would look a lot better. And that happened. And they took the House and the Senate. And that played a role. And, at the same time, you see Colorado continue to um, try to enforce reporting on campaign finance. At the time, these were IRS 527s, super geeky, not super PACs as we know them today. And they operate under these IRS regulations. And the state passed laws saying if you are operating one of these things, you have got to report everything just like any committee, any sort of political committee. And
Yeah.
yeah, you can take unlimited money, spend it, but you've got to report it all. And so that's a big change. And then, the whole super PAC atmosphere after 2010 really took off. You know, I love the book, The Blueprint. I think I bought several copies and I always lend them to people and then I need to buy another
Yeah.
copy. But, former state representative Rob Whitwer, a former Republican, and Adam Schrager, who was a great political reporter at Nine News in the aughts. And they wrote this great book looking at how the Democrats did this. It came out in 2010. And it just, they formed different organizations like Progress Now. New Era formed in like, I think, 2006 or so. You just have all these different avenues of nonprofits that also did activism. One of the things I would say too here is we should talk a little bit about those TV ads. Well, kids these days don't actually watch TV. I mean, in 2012, I
Yeah.
had a class at CU and we started following TV ads, and somebody from a national organization wanted one of my students to DVR the four networks and CNN and maybe something else for 24 hours and count the political ads. And I'm like, okay, I will ask them, but I'm pretty sure none of them have TVs, okay? Or cable. And I was right. Oh, they weren't paying enough either. But, you know, one of the things academics have told me too, the ads, you might see a lot of them, but they're not as effective as the whole get out the vote thing. And I think activating voters and getting to people, talking to them about your candidate, their issues, trying to relate to them, encouraging them to to go vote is more effective. TV ads are easier.
Yeah. You get more people, right? More eyes.
Yeah, you get more eyes, but get out the vote and canvassing type activities are expensive, but they're more effective when it comes to actually delivering. And I think that's an interesting thing here. I think that is something that's going to really play a big role nationally and in Colorado in 2024. You know, Alvina, you and I like to talk about this stuff, and we're paying a ton of attention, and we may not be normal because
Yeah, exactly. Not everybody pays
no,
attention to that
many
stuff. Yeah.
people are just tuned out. Like I was looking at some Pew statistics from last fall. People just don't want to hear about the presidential race between two people that's like a rerun of 4 years ago.
Yeah.
People are just kind of tuning it out. And I think both parties are going to be really focused on um, getting people to turn out to vote. Even
Yeah.
the Republican National Committee has this. I'm trying to remember what they call it. They've got this Bank Your Vote initiative where they're trying to get people to vote early, which is something that you know their likely presidential nominee has not been a fan of people voting early or voting by mail. And now they're trying to switch that focus because it's helped Democrats.
I mean, I think what you're talking about is really important and how to reach voters now. I mean, you can't spend that much. I mean, obviously there's political limits, and I mean, obviously for us, a lot of people don't know there's political limits on how much you can spend on TV because there's only so many spots and they're at a certain political rate. You can't be bouncing the rates up and down. So there's like a political window. So that's limiting. Mail pieces are super expensive, but also, you know, they're difficult to get done and very costly as well. And like you said, they don't have the the relationship that you're building with the voters to get out the vote. So now with this changing media landscape, where do you think folks are looking for news? And is it really just siphoned off where there's like your MSNBC people and your Fox people and there's nothing in the middle?
I would go beyond that. But, younger people, I have to say, I myself don't watch much TV news. I see what the local stations are doing in my news feeds or on social media. And people are looking at social media And I think that they're, using that as a cue of where to look. And they're probably Googling.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the things in the media landscape, I think one of the things that we at the Sun are trying to do, and others are too, is try to provide just some basic info, some explainers of, here is how the legislature works, and here's how you can get in touch with them, or here is how candidates get on the ballot, and
Yeah.
how you can get involved. You know, for the past couple of cycles, we've really been looking at on the big competitive races. There aren't that many of us, so we focus on the big things. And to just say, here are the three Republican candidates for Secretary of State and where they stand on the issues.
Mhm.
A little bio of each of them, and then the issues. And ask them the same questions and see what they have to say. And it puts it in a really digestible form for for the voter when they get to that point where they've got their ballot. And I think that that's one of the focuses we need to have is just, here's this reliable source of information.
Yeah.
It shows up on Google, hopefully high up, and people will see it. I know, I that's what I do. I go to like Denverite when I'm really looking for information on local Denver issues, and I think they do a good job of that, and Colorado Public Radio does too. So, you know, I think that people will tune in eventually. I think that voter turnout piece, one of the things that happened because political parties can't coordinate with these super PACs is that the parties have sort of been taken out of of the equation a little bit. But one of the things they can do
Interesting.
is spend the money that they get, which is limited by federal or state laws. They can spend that on voter turnout. And this is another thing that is happening in Colorado in 2024 is that the Democratic Party decided that, you had two toss-up districts. The third, which was the closest race in the US House in the nation in 2022,
Mhm.
and then CD8 in suburban um, Adams and Weld County. And they started last summer canvassing, identifying voters who don't always participate in those two districts last summer. They're trying to
Yeah.
engage people, talk to them about what they're interested in. And that's how they're spending their money. At the same time, you have had the Republican Party, their leadership, they very much think that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. Spoiler alert, he did not. And they have had trouble raising money. They seem to be focusing a lot of attention on helping candidates they like and working against those that they don't. And all three, they have 3 of the 10 seats in Congress, 3 of the 8 in the US House. And those seats, the 2 are solidly Republican, and both of those House members are leaving after fairly long tenures. Ken Buck first announced his
Yeah.
resignation, that he wouldn't run again in November. And then Doug Lamborn, just a couple weeks ago, announced that he wouldn't run, which
Yeah.
took us by surprise. And then Lauren Boebert, who represents the third, barely won her seat back in 2022. She's going to run in the fourth now, which is on a different side of the state.
I just wanna highlight how you mentioned, starting a year in advance, talking to voters all consistently because they don't, have time to honestly think about these things all the time, but it's also hard to think about how your day to day is impacted by that vote. So the investment in you're investing in people when you're investing in going to the door and talking to them and finding out what they need to know to be a more engaged and important voter. Also, that if they are the least engaged voters and you're spending time with them, the you're going to get a longer relationship. They're going to become more involved and they're probably the most impacted, honestly, by the laws. So I think it's important that they are the ones that we're spending time on because they're the least that we're listening to when they should be the most that we're listening to.
Yeah, and you're the political consulting expert, but so I would agree with you. I just think turnout, and
Yeah.
I think people, if you're a not super involved person in politics, you probably aren't listening to this, but people need to prepare themselves that there are going to be a lot of contacts out there. I'm not sure how the Republican Party in Colorado is going to manage that. I think that they're going to have to depend on, say, the National Republican Congressional Campaign to fulfill that role in CD8, maybe in CD3,
Yeah.
maybe in these other places. Once again, it's who you nominate and how do people feel about that candidate.
I can't believe time is running out already. But I wanted to get from you over your experiences, what was the most, I guess, funniest, best experience that you've had in these circles that you've been rolling in Colorado for 30 years, is what you said.
Oh, in Colorado, I think I have to say the most surprised I've been was in 2022. I could not believe that Democrats won some of the state legislative seats they won, that they won the statewide offices by such a large margin. It just was surprising. And it says something about how Coloradans feel about this attitude about 2020 and who won.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that's a question that we in the media have to explain all the time. I'll tell you one thing from Florida. I actually worked in Florida for a statewide elected official for like 20 months in the state capitol and the PR thing. And at one point we were setting our goals for the coming year. And our goal, one of them was not to have him be called a political nymphomaniac in print again. Because it had already happened.
Again. Oh my gosh.
He frequently ran for office, and then eventually he didn't. But he did not win.
Oh my gosh.
He was going to run for governor and then dropped out mysteriously. He ran for the U.S. Senate and went to a runoff and lost the runoff. And the person who won it also lost the election. So it was an interesting. Florida has changed a lot too. It's very different.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, thanks again, Sandra, for spending time with me.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me, Alvina. It's going to be an interesting year.
It's going to be interesting. We'll have to be back and have another conversation in a couple months and see what's going on.
The primaries for those 3 Republican congressional seats are crowded, and they're going to be wild to watch.
Very interesting to watch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalkshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.